Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Hump Day. Hope hope you guys are having a great Wednesday. Hope it's a nice day wherever you may be. I know some places are seeing some really nice, beautiful spring weather. Hopefully, you're getting out and about during the days, during the afternoons. Hey, Chantel, thank you for joining me. Nice to see you. Um, So today, I wanted to talk a little bit about emotional intelligence, or EQ, the emotional quotient. Um, we have the IQ, which is the intelligence quotient. We also have the EQ, which is the emotional quotient. And so today I was just looking to see what you guys think about, EQ, emotional intelligence, and what your sort of understanding about it is. So back in the, I guess, 80s, it became really popular. Awesome to see you too, Chantel. I'm going to sneeze briefly, momentarily. Hey, Stuart, nice to see you, buddy. I... excuse me. Sorry about that. Yes. No, I'm not. I don't have allergies. It's just one of those things. It was just a momentary sneeze. And no, I don't have the COVID, as far as I'm aware. So anyway, back in the 80s, emotional intelligence became really kind of de rigueur in workplace environments, things like that. A lot of bosses took EQ tests and wanted to kind of discover what kind of leadership style they had based on their emotional intelligence and how they could work better with their employees. So there's 5 sort of elements of emotional intelligence, and I want to kind of chat about each one and what I think, and what impact I think EQ has on our ability to be resilient and be, kind of more relatable in terms of our abilities as humans with each other. So 1 is self-awareness, 2 is self-regulation, 3 is internal motivation, so what sort of motivates you internally, 4 is your ability to empathy, and 5 is your social skills. And we all know, somebody who is basically, socially inept, right? Somebody who's a real introvert, really shy, really reserved, really withholds a lot of things. So social skills aren't really a critical factor of emotional intelligence, but they can be, depending on how that social skill is, or how it manifests itself, say in groups or in things like that. So let's start about self-awareness, right? Self-awareness is critical in emotional intelligence, right? We have to be critically self-aware of ourselves because it's our own sort of ability to understand who and what we are that really gives us the root of our emotional intelligence. If we can't identify our emotions, if we can't put a word or a name or a label, right? That's okay. But if we can't identify what we're feeling, right, or what the emotion is that we're sensing, that's a critical sort of factor in determining whether or not you have a strong level of emotional intelligence. It is crucial to know what you're feeling and when you're feeling it, and what that means, and how you can then sort of interpret that, right? Becomes the next step, which is the self-regulation piece, right? So self-regulation is controlling not just your emotions, but your impulses to act behind those emotions, or in reaction to those emotions. So, there's this old saying that we should respond, not react to situations. Now, or to words, or to, the way that people are, perceiving us, etc. that's emotional intelligence in action, right? Because we're regulating what it is that we are doing. You know, if we have a measured response, a way of responding that is within our power, right? And I want to actually talk about personal power at some point too. I talked a little bit about it earlier in one of my talks, but I want to talk about that a bit more, because emotional intelligence, EQ, is really all about personal power, right? Your own power inside of you, right? We all have that power to manage our emotions. The question is, how good are we and how successful are we at doing that? You know, for instance, I am guilty. Yeah, I will not excuse myself for the amount of times that I, you know, get angry at what I perceive as bad drivers. Okay? Think about it, right? We're driving along the freeway. Somebody just mindlessly cuts over into your lane. You have to push on your brakes. You're, you know, what the hell? You know, why aren't you paying any attention? So I have notoriously been that way. And over this last year, I've worked really, really hard to try and put myself in other people's shoes, right? It's the empathy piece that comes into emotional intelligence later on, right? Or is one of the 5 key elements. If by putting myself in their shoes, right? That person, I don't know, maybe they're just their mind is elsewhere. They're planning the funeral for their mother or their spouse, or they've just been berated by their boss for losing a big deal and just aren't paying any attention, and they cut in front of you and cut you off. I mean, there's all sorts of things that happen. Yes, sometimes people do things maliciously and purposefully, but to hurt others. But the reality is that most of the time, what I perceived as bad drivers is just people who are being people, right? Who are having a bad day or a bad moment, or their mind has wandered to something that, really concerned them or upset them, and they just weren't paying enough attention. And that's actually how most accidents happen, okay? So as long as I'm present when I'm driving now, and I'm driving through, kindness. Okay, seriously, I think, I lead with my heart, not my head. Obviously, I pay very close attention to what I'm doing when I'm driving, but I'm leading with my heart. So therefore, if somebody does cut me off or they jam on their brakes, as long as I'm paying attention, I generally tend to be, okay with things, and I respond rather than react to what's happening around me. Obviously, if there's an emergency situation, I will react very quickly, hopefully, and spare myself the horrific option of getting into an accident. And that's really what my internal motivation is all about, right? So these 5 things: self-awareness, self-regulation, internal motivation, empathy, and social skills, right? Those are the 5 key elements of emotional intelligence. So the self-awareness piece, right, I talked about that. That's just being aware of what you're feeling in that moment, right? And being able to identify the emotions, even, understanding that the thoughts and the emotions that you're feeling are really internal to you, okay? That's part of emotional intelligence, okay? So, I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt once said something along the lines of, you can't control what others think about you. You can only control what you think about others, right? Something like that. And that's absolutely true. And it is something that is really important. It's an important element of emotional intelligence, is knowing and understanding that you have the control over how you think and feel, not just about yourself, but about others, right? You cannot control what others think or feel. You can't even know what others think and feel. The empathy piece of emotional intelligence is trying to put yourself into someone else's shoes, into someone else's skin, and trying to understand what it is that they feel and what they're thinking at that moment. But that is not possible. I mean, none of us are mind readers. And, as Oscar Wilde once said, be yourself, everyone else is taken, right? Well, we can't be anyone else other than ourselves. So we only have the perception of what we believe or we think or we feel others might be feeling. Now, some of us have a really highly sensitive personality or high intuition abilities, and we do get a sense of what other people are thinking or feeling. A lot of people have an ability to do that with animals, right? We all have this empathy, or we're all born with it. Some of us have less than others, right? And the less you have, the more you fall on what's called the autism spectrum. And that, that can really impact your ability to empathize with others. It's also, the further along you are on the autism spectrum, the more difficulty you have reading other people's facial expressions, emotional expressions, etc. So empathy is critical for emotional intelligence. But the two key things are the self-awareness and the self-regulation bits, because, of course, those are the things that you and that I have 100% control over, right? And the more we lead with the heart rather than the head, right? The true self rather than the small ego self, we are able to develop our emotional intelligence. So this is why I asked in my question, are you thinking it's all about emotions? Well, no, it's not. It's not just about emotions. Emotional intelligence is about a lot of things. But is it something that we can change? Is it something that we can grow and develop? And absolutely we can, okay? We can shut our emotions down. We can turn them on and off. We can ignore them. We can label them. We can do all of these things with our emotions, right? But the reality is that by switching them off, we become unsympathetic and we become unempathetic. It becomes impossible to empathize with other people if we switch off all of our emotions. Excuse me, just gonna have a drink. So, being comfortable with our emotions is the hardest piece, okay? And that takes practice, and it takes work. And it has been proven, sorry guys, and I'm talking about men here, men are less capable of identifying and labeling their emotions than women are, right? Men tend to pen up their rage, their anger, their frustration. They don't, they don't talk about it, right? They just keep it all inside, which is why men actually suffer from stress and have heart attacks more than women do, because unfortunately we don't know how to express ourselves emotionally or adequately emotionally. And that is a critical element of emotional intelligence. So coming back to these sort of 5 components or 5 main components of emotional intelligence, the self-awareness piece is really difficult for men to sort of figure out and identify with. And I guess from my perspective, it's taken a lot of hard work for me to do that. I've tried to learn a language that allows me to really speak my truth when it comes to my emotions. Part of it is obviously because, I've had to deal with such tremendous grief in the last couple of years. First, the grief of my wife being re-diagnosed with cancer, and then the grief of her dying from that. Those were, really difficult times. And For a period after she died, I switched myself off emotionally. I was numb. I did not want to feel anything. I didn't want to be anything other than just alive. Breathe in and breathe out. And that's taking the self-regulation piece to an extreme, right? So that self-regulation, which is the next bit, is managing your impulses and emotions, pushed me all the way to the wrong end of the spectrum in a sense that, I was almost on the autism spectrum in some ways because I was so closed off emotionally, right? I didn't want to feel. I didn't want to express my feelings other than, my sadness and sometimes my anger at what was going on outside of me, the loss of my wife and such. And recently, actually, somebody told me, well, actually, Christy told me this, and I love Christy for so many reasons, but this was something that was really profound. Her husband died when he was 30, and when she was, I think, 29, so 20 years ago. And sorry, Christy, I just told everybody how old you are. But Greg dying, her husband dying, was none of her business. And that was a really profound thing to learn. And to me, it's the same. Suzanne dying is none of my business. And that was a profound shift in terms of, my sort of self-regulation piece, because it kind of brought me back to this sense of reality that, okay, yes, I'm okay being angry. I'm okay being upset and sad. I'm okay being confused and experiencing this whole range of emotions around the grief of losing Suzanne. Okay? But the fact that she died is not my business, right? It's not me. I didn't die. I didn't have to talk about, my emotions around that if I didn't want to, but I found that it was a lot easier to talk about my emotions around that once I understood that it was really not something that I could control, obviously, and it was not something that was really my, in my sort of realm of reality. I mean, it was my whole reality, and then it was not my reality. It's hard to explain because unless you've been through it, it's something that that you just you won't really understand. And I know that the people around who have been through this do get it. But it's again it comes down to this whole piece about self-regulation, and then there's this other piece which is the internal motivation, right? And that's what the whole thing about it not being any of my business really shifted in me, right? So the internal motivation is like, well, okay, if I am motivated to make clear decisions around my emotions, right, what am I going to do if I'm in a period of sustained grief? I'm going to make decisions that are not necessarily in my best interest. They aren't going to serve me very well, which is why, in actual fact, a lot of grief counselors and a lot of people who talk about loss, profound loss like this, will say don't do anything rash in the first year, right? And the reason is because as you're going through this first sort of year after somebody dies, that somebody that's very, very close to you, a parent, a spouse, whatever, oftentimes you're in mourning and you don't really think clearly, and you don't, you're not regulating your emotions adequately. So, you can improve that, and you can change that over time by simply identifying and understanding what it is that you're feeling, and that you're, and that you need to basically, not act rashly, not react, but respond better to situations, or just respond rather than react to situations. So acting rashly, acting irrationally, acting in a way that is detrimental not just to yourself but to those around you. One of the worst things that we can experience is road rage, right? As individuals. And I talked about this a few moments ago when I said, I used to be, and I still occasionally lapse, okay? I'm not perfect here. In fact, I think I was on the phone the other day and, driving in the car, hands-free, yes. And somebody in front of me literally came to a complete stop while making a right turn into a road, right? And there's no crossing there, and there was nobody in a crosswalk, so they weren't stopping for anyone. And when you go from 35 miles an hour, and this guy literally just kind of slammed on and stopped and then made his right turn, possibly because he didn't know that was the road that he needed to turn on, whatever, he was distracted, or maybe he was just looking for someplace and didn't realize that it came on him that quickly. Needless to say, I nearly ran up the back of him, right? Because it was that quick and that sudden that he jammed on and went right. And fortunately, I was able to go around him to the left and swerve around him in the next lane. But, it was pretty close. And to me, gosh, previously I would have been spitting feathers, as they say in the UK. I would have been like, but instead I reacted like, whoa, hey, whoa, okay, that's, you're not supposed to come to a complete stop when making a right turn unless there's somebody in a crossing. Usually, when there's no traffic light or anything like that. And it was literally just turning into a road. But previously, if I hadn't been where I am now in terms of my own emotional intelligence development, I probably would have got all, pissed off and yelled and screamed and ranted and flipped the guy off and done all sorts of things, right? But instead, I didn't react. I responded as, quickly as I possibly could. I reacted in the sense that my instinct made me pull into the lane to the left where it was clear, fortunately. And I did actually look at the time. I looked at that very moment to see that there was nobody next to me. But I didn't react in a way that was negative, that was road rage-ish, right? And that's something that's new for me in many ways because, to be quite frank, for many, many years, I was a hot dogger and would drive too fast and too close to cars in front of me. And you know what? I've realized that A, that's dangerous, and B, it's just not worth it. Is it, leave 5 minutes earlier and, just get to where you need to go slower and safer. And part of that is leading with the heart. So again, coming back to this whole thing about self-awareness, self-regulation, what is my motivation, and empathizing, right? Those are the critical success factors for emotional intelligence. Now, this last piece, which is social skill, right? I can work a room like nobody's business, right? Networking, doing all of those things. But in this last year or so, I have realized how emotionally draining and difficult it is. I would so much rather just have a conversation with one person or two people just for, 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever it may be, than to have chit-chat with 100 people in a room, right? It just doesn't work for me. It just drains me, and it fills me with dread now, okay? And I recognize that, okay? So again, this is part of the ability of building emotional intelligence is being able to recognize that my social skills, while very good, I can network with the best of them. I know that my preference is to be one-on-one or, in a smaller group of, say, 2 or 3 people, right? And that's because I'm more interested in the emotional depth, the quality of the conversation rather than the quantity, right? And again, that comes back to this self-awareness piece, right? Knowing that I am that kind of person makes it easier for me to focus on those things that are, that are within my control. That's the self-regulation piece, right? Um, so I manage my impulses and my emotions, and I, try to act with caution rather than rashly. You know, and I do that because, um, I really truly have a passion for getting to know people on a much deeper level, right? Than just say, the sort of top line kind of thinking. What do you do? Why do you do it? That sort of thing. I'd rather know, say like Nina or Corey, what is it that you wanted to do when you were a child? And are you doing that now? And if not, why not? What changed in you that caused you to pursue something completely different from what you wanted to be as a child? I wanted to be a fireman because I wanted to help people, right? But I have a really, really close friend who I grew up with. In fact, I could do with his help right now because he moonlighted as a barber. He was a fireman. He actually was a battalion chief at our local fire station. And I seriously could do with his help as a barber. But he had such a horrific time back in the 70s and 80s dealing with his post-traumatic stress as a fireman. He actually discouraged me from being a firefighter because he felt like it was a job that I would, as a fairly, sensitive child, I probably wouldn't handle very well. But here I am now, I finally remembered my calling, that I'm here to help people. That's my passion, is to help others. Whatever that may manifest itself as, that's my passion. So here I am. And so I hope that, by my developing my own emotional intelligence over these last couple of years, and particularly over this last sort of 6 to 8 months, as I really dive deep into my heart, as I said a couple of weeks ago, the hardest journey I've ever had to make was this 15-inch journey from here to here, right? Literally, that's all it is. It is the most difficult journey you will ever take, but I recommend it to everyone, okay? And I got to thank my yoga teacher, Leslie, for talking about that, because she's the one who really put that idea into my head a number of months ago, that this is the hardest journey you'll ever take. And she's right. It is. But well worth it. And your emotional intelligence will explode once you've actually done that. Once you actually start living from your heart rather than living from your head and your ego and your small self. So anyway, so that's my piece on emotional intelligence. I really appreciate everybody coming in and dropping in and saying hi and watching. And tomorrow we're one day closer to the weekend. So Thursday, 12 noon Pacific Standard Time. I will have another subject to talk about. Still got a few left on the list here. So hopefully I'll get some more interaction, but 12 noon Pacific time tomorrow. Thank you again for joining me. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you all again tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. You're halfway through the work week. Good luck with the rest of the day, and I hope to see you tomorrow. Take care, everybody.